BC law is targeting people who post intimate photos without consent. It would also make it easier for victims to sue for compensation. With more on this, we are joined by Tiana Sharifi, the founder of Sexual Exploitation Education. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me again.
Absolutely. So we wanted to get your reaction to this proposed legislation and your thoughts on how far it's going to go to combat sexual exploitation.
I think this is excellent. We have made an act here that very much demonstrates to victims that we believe in you, we support you, we want to provide with you accessibility to really get change and retribution if something like this happens. I think that this very much communicates that we take violence like this seriously and we understand that harm done even digitally is still a reality for people. And I think that in terms of what we will see moving forward is that we're going to have more disclosures. A lot of victims don't come forward because they're worried about the long legal process. And so this is going to provide them with an alternative that will be definitely much easier to see results with.
Yes, so the government saying that if this legislation is passed, it will create a fast-track process for getting legal decisions on whether images were shared without consent. How important is that?
Incredibly. What we find is that a lot of kids, especially, I work with youth specifically, and so what I see is that a lot of them don't come forward, they don't go through the process. They might disclose, but they think that, there's so much shame and stigma around it, there's so much complications with going through the criminal courts that they don't come forward, they don't seek help, and then you see such a consequence afterwards as a result, whether it's mental health or on a more serious note, suicide in some situations that we've seen. So I think what this really demonstrates is that it doesn't need to be criminal. We can also have a civil pursuit. It's much easier. There's less burden of proof. It still puts the onus on the offender, and it gets you the results in a much more streamlined way, and just in a way that is more simple and approachable and accessible.
How far do you think it goes to deterring suspects in the first place, or people to exploit youth on the internet with these sexual images?
I think in order to see that deterrence, we will have to see this act being used and in practice and successful. And unfortunately, while this is a really wonderful intervention piece, we have to focus more on the prevention, whether it's through education or through these corporations, making sure that they are not providing a platform for offenders like this to do what they want to do. So I think that, in order to really see this issue shift and change, there needs to be more emphasis on prevention education, and then as well, corporations making sure that they are creating platforms that truly do keep people safe.
Yeah, and it's just so important just to have the conversation, like you said, because it reduces the stigma for those who might be suffering right now. But we also know, and you kind of alluded to, is there are many legal challenges. We heard from Amanda Todd's mother during the announcement yesterday, and of course we know in her case there was a suspect, an international suspect here. So how difficult do you think it gets when you are dealing with the internet and you're dealing with people all around the world?
I think it gets difficult, especially when you're working on platforms that are international, and you have to get search warrants for that. You have to track the IP addresses. And again, when we're talking about a criminal charge and the process for that and the burden of proof and the jury and the cost, we definitely do see that it does create a better space for the offender. And so this is where I'm really hoping that with a civil pursuit, even if you're international, because it's person to person, and it does not require all these other elements that a criminal charge would, that hopefully we do see more of action being taken and of offenders being held responsible.
Well, let's hope that it does, lead to some prevention at the very least. Tiana, thank you very much for joining us today.